Hey guys, we tried filming a Far Cry Primal intro, and we didn't really get along as well as we thought it would, and everything recorded turned to ash, so here's what's left over of the intro. Okay, go.
Yo, Far Cry Primal's gameplay is totally realistic how cavemen actually killed them back then.
Yeah? Haven't played the game, can't tell you.
Yo, Primal's gameplay is totally realistic how they
Do it again! Do it again!
This is no suspicion.
No! I have to buy a new
I'll
one!
buy one.
Hey kids! It's Plungy the Plungy! I'm okay now! You are the one!
You want to talk and I'll just do this? Never mind, it's broken now.
Before we get this review started, I got a short history lesson for you, and when I mean history lesson, I mean way back in the old 2012 when Far Cry 3 was released. It was and still is a fantastic open world first person shooter that's one of the best games on PlayStation 3. Shortly after its release, Ubisoft released a small downloadable spin-off game, Far Cry Blood Dragon, which is one of my favorite digital exclusive titles I've ever played. If you've never heard of it, then look it up during your spare time because it's incredible. Then in 2014, Far Cry 4 came out, and gameplay-wise, it improves upon Far Cry 3 in almost every way. So some of us weren't super surprised when it was announced that Ubisoft was making another Far Cry spin-off that was going to be released after the 4th installment. We now have Far Cry Primal, a game that takes place in 10,000 BC that uses the firmly established Far Cry formula. The idea of killing cavemen with spears, bows and arrows, and clubs sounds like a joy of fun, but instead of making a short, cheaper spin-off title that wouldn't overstay its welcome, Primal is instead a game that has been stretched and pulled apart so it could be a full retail game. And it's because of this that Primal falls short of being a must-play title. But this doesn't mean you shouldn't play the game, so let's find out what Far Cry Primal is all about. Primal takes place in the Stone Age, where mankind is still struggling to understand fire, ferocious beasts can be found almost anywhere you go, and where The Walking Dead hasn't become mainstream yet. You play as a man named Takar, who has a beard, which is basically the only thing anybody knows about him. After a hunting trip goes wrong, like horribly wrong, you are then tasked with bringing together the Winja tribe so you can take down the two other supposedly evil tribes, the flesh-eating Udom tribe and the Izelia tribe, who are the masters of fire. And that's pretty much the whole plot. No crazy plot twists, no branching narratives, and barely any separate plot threads. Primal's story is simple for the sake of letting you get in and out of the action quickly, as your main objective throughout the entire game, besides fighting the other tribes, is to have your Winja village grow in size, which was a surprising amount of fun. What's become a staple of Far Cry as of recently are the over-the-top, insanely entertaining villains, which is not present in Primal. Yes, both villains are intimidating and unpredictable, but they don't take center stage, which was a nice change of pace. What hasn't changed, unfortunately, are the supporting characters you come across. Characters like Tensei and Scylla are likable, friendly faces, but almost every single other character you come across is a character that's either unstable or just super self-centered. And to clarify, there is nothing wrong with being crazy or self-centered. I'm one of the craziest and most self-centered people you'll ever meet, but your interactions with these characters are the same every time. You walk in somewhere, they show off how one-dimensional and interesting they are, they'll probably do something crazy, they'll insult you, and then ask you to do something and then act unimpressed when you come back. It's annoying, especially when Takar, the character you're playing as, doesn't stand up for himself. This bothers me because it's a cheap way to create quote-unquote character, and it comes off as lazy. The coolest thing about the game's storytelling is the dialogue, as Ubisoft hired a team to create 3 different languages for the 3 different in-game tribes. While many of us were very hesitant to read subtitles throughout the whole game, it quickly didn't become a bother. It was very interesting to see the game's actors portray emotion with a language that was new to them, and it really added to the game's immersion as it helped me feel like I went back in time. Like with Far Cry 4, Primal is gorgeous and runs almost perfectly. Trees and bushes sway with the wind, the sun peeks through trees and creates visually pleasing landscapes, and the amount of wildlife that occupies the world convinced me that I was actually exploring a land during the Stone Age. But man, did they really screw up with the water. All the animals look authentic and interact with each other in a believable way. What's really disappointing about the game's presentation is how varied the world is. There isn't a whole lot to discover and not many different things to see. The world barely contains any secrets or visually different locations, and I got pretty tired looking at the same things over and over again. The only time you'll see something a little bit different is when you're using the wonderful magical thing we call drugs, which is another series staple at this point. The most impressive thing about Primal's presentation as a whole is the game's sound design. I've already mentioned how much I admire the game's voice acting and the languages that were made to immerse the player, but the music is haunting, layered, and violent. All the animals sound so realistic that walking around and hearing the roar of a saber-toothed tiger at nighttime may actually scare the poop out of you. In the end, Primal's sound design is extraordinary and definitely deserves the mention. So, there you go, it has been mentioned. Even with such a vastly different premise, Primal's gameplay is largely exactly the same as the recent Far Cry games. You run around, kill people and animals, complete missions, boring side quests, clear outposts, and all the usual open world junk. But combat has changed quite a bit, as you can tell. No more pistols, rifles, rocket launchers, vehicles, or anything. Your main weapons are the bow and arrow, a club, and a spear, and they all have their own purposes. The bow and arrow is perfect for stealth, long-range combat, and hunting smaller game. The club was great for fighting humans up close, and the spear is good for hunting larger animals, whether you want to repeatedly stab them or just throw your spear straight through them. While you do acquire more creative weapons to use against your enemies, these three weapons work so well that there isn't much encouragement to experiment in combat. But fighting enemies with your club and spear is violent and dirty. Swinging your club around is kinda clunky, similar to the melee combat of Skyrim, but when you charge straight towards an enemy and perform a takedown, whacking them across the head with a club is disgusting and absolutely satisfying. It is unfortunate though that fighting enemies does get repetitive fairly quickly, and it doesn't help that both human and animal AI isn't as good as past Far Cry games. What should have been more important compared to past games is the act of hunting animals and scavenging all sorts of different materials needed to upgrade your weapons and inventory. You'll actually be against animals more often than you would against regular crazy humans. While fighting wolves and the occasional tiger or lion doesn't seem to be too difficult, mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, and that damn badger are incredibly hard to fight against. It's unfortunate though that there really isn't much incentive to hunt and skin animals, as fun as it may be. While upgrading to carry more inventory and have different equipment has become a necessity in the previous Far Cry games, the weapons and equipment you carry in the beginning of the game are not that much different compared to what you can earn later on. But it does become addicting and immensely satisfying hunting down some of the game's rarer animals. Oh, and hunting at nighttime is a completely different ballgame. Animals are incredibly more vicious and common, which means walking around with fire is basically a necessity. Just be careful, fire likes to spread. The coolest addition of Far Cry Primal is the ability to tame animals. After feeding and approaching a wild animal, you could tame them and have them fight on your side. You could tell them where to go, who to attack, and with some of the bigger animals, you're even allowed to ride them into battle. The problem is that besides some animals being slightly stronger and slightly faster than others, there's no incentive to hunt down and tame other animals, as they all practically work the same. Besides the owl that has the ability to scout the area and tag enemies, all animals have the exact same abilities, which make taming animals seem like a half-baked mechanic. My biggest problem with Far Cry Primal is that it isn't enjoyable. I never felt a real purpose to continue progressing through the game, and I haven't had much fun with the game anyways. The story didn't interest me to continue to see how it ends, the combat is repetitive, there isn't much to discover, and hunting gets old very quickly. The reason I pushed through to see the end of the game, and the same reason most other people enjoy playing it, is because Primal explores a time period that hasn't been explored much in video games before. And while I was immersed in the game's setting and time period, that was basically my only motivation to continue through. The game takes around 15 hours to get through the main story, with multiple outposts, optional side quests, and collectibles to go through, but there's no point in doing so. It isn't much fun to explore an empty open world, but going through the story did have some enjoyable moments. Far Cry Primal explores a time period that has rarely been explored in the world of video games. The setting feels authentic, the combat feels just like it should, and the sound design truly has the power to immerse you in what is basically a survival simulator that takes place in 10,000 BC. But this is a Far Cry game, and unfortunately, the gameplay feels like a step backwards. It gets repetitive very quickly, and there's little incentive to see the conclusion of the game, and the lack of an engaging story doesn't help either. Primal would have benefited in being a smaller, tighter digital title like Blood Dragon, instead of an expanded, empty, full-price game. While I had much fun being the king of the jungle, the excitement only lasts for so long. Far Cry Primal receives a 7 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and stay fresh!